In this video, I'd like to discuss a rather subtle point regarding conditionals. Let's look at the code sample in front of us. On line 1, we set a variable called z to hold the number 100. Then on line 2, we begin our conditional statement, which says, if z is greater than 10, then move on to line 3 and print the number 1 to the terminal. Line 4 begins our second path of our conditional, which says, else if z is greater than 20, then execute line 5, which would print the number 2 to the terminal. Finally, we move on to line 6, which says else, meaning if none of the previous conditions have been met, meaning z is not greater than 10 and it's not greater than 20, then let's go to this fallback clause and execute line 7, which would print 3 to the terminal. So the question here is, given that in this example z is actually 100, it technically meets more than one condition of this conditional statement, right? Because it is both greater than 10, which was the condition from line 2, but it's also greater than 20, which is the condition from line 4. So what will happen? At first glance, we may guess that perhaps lines 3 and 5 will both get executed, and that we will print both the numbers 1 and 2 to the terminal. But for this, we invoke the blue-orange rule of conditionals, which I introduced to you a couple of videos ago, which states that for any given conditional statement, we only execute one path. And this holds true 100% of the time. It is impossible that Ruby will ever execute more than one path of a given conditional. Therefore, we can rule out the possibility that we will print numbers 1 and 2 to the terminal, because that would be going down two paths. We could only go down one path. But now the question is, which path will it go down? Will we end up printing 1 to the terminal because z is greater than 10, or will we print the number 2 to the terminal since z is also greater than 20? Now this goes back to our good old concept of code flow, which is that Ruby and virtually all programming languages move from top to bottom one line at a time. Therefore, what Ruby will do is as follows. On line 2, when it says if z is greater than 10, that is the first path that Ruby encounters simply because it's moving from top down. Since indeed z is greater than 10, since it's 100, Ruby says, okay, we're going to execute this first path. And therefore it runs the code on line 3, which prints 1 to the terminal. Now, even though on the very next line it says else if z is greater than 20 and z is greater than 20, but at this point, Ruby says to itself, well, I've already gone down one path from this conditional statement, and the blue-orange rule says, once you go down one path, you can no longer go down any other path. So at this point, Ruby says, I'm done with this entire conditional statement, and it will move and skip all the way to the end statement on line 8. So essentially, Ruby will execute the first path that is possible. Once it executes that path, it skips to the end statement and moves on from there. Let's run our code to see this in action. So as you can see, we executed the first path, the one from line 3, and we print 1 to the terminal. Now, were we to switch things around and say on line 2 if z is greater than 20, and on line 4 if z is greater than 10, so here as well, Ruby would first encounter line 2, which says if z is greater than 20, and z is greater than 20. So it would simply execute this first path, it would print 1 to the terminal, and then even though technically it is also greater than 10, which is the condition on line 4, it doesn't matter. Ruby says, I've already executed the one path from this conditional, so I will skip all the way down to the end statement on line 8 and move on from there. Now in this example, it is possible to hit the second clause if z were less than 20 but still greater than 10. So let's say we made z 11. So now, as Ruby moves down the code, it says to itself on line 2, if z is greater than 20, well, z is not greater than 20 because it's only 11. We're then going to move on to the else if clause, which says else if z is greater than 10. Now here z is greater than 10 because it's 11, and we will therefore execute line 5 and print the number 2 to the terminal, as we shall see now. And then only then skip to the end.